Professor.
Hi. Okay. So you can see me, right? And so
Yeah.
I'm recording this video, so I will send you the link if when it's done, so that you can watch it if you want to. So let's open up your paper here and talk about your paper. So make sure I share the screen, and I think that's the paper there. You go here, and okay. So you sent me another draft, and so this is the draft that you sent me, and so we can go through. You can see it here. Okay, so I want to make sure that you use and cite information from 3 different chapters. So page 89, I assume that's one chapter. Page 8, that's another chapter. So yeah, and page 34, that's chapter 2. Okay, so you're using cite information from 3 different chapters, at least 3 different chapters from chapters 1 through 12. Okay, so that's good. I also suggested in terms of improving your writing skills that you don't need to say just make the statement that you just say the biggest difference between Xenophon is the view of American history, and then you're going to explain why. Okay.
I saw that feedback yesterday, like midnight. Good. So I didn't able to fix it. So sorry.
Well, it's good that you're really motivated, and so that's good. So you say the biggest difference between Zinn and Flynn is the view of American history. Zinn explains and describes history with a one-sided and biased gaze. According to Flynn, Howard Zinn is a master of cheap Marxist propaganda. And according to Flynn's journal about Howard Zinn's biased history and conclusion, part 2, paragraph, his book is a dagger in the heart. Yeah, at the heart, the country that has given him more freedom than most of the writers who have ever written and made him a millionaire in the process. Yeah, so I think that illustrates what I was talking about with the other student who I just met with. That one of Flynn's biggest sources of anger with Zinn is that basically Zinn is undermining the will, the morale, the national morale of the American people by, in effect, he, and not necessarily Zinn, because Zinn's been dead for 11 years, but that the people that like Zinn and use Zinn's book in their high school classes or their college classes, that this is the most popular textbook, one of the most popular textbooks for college and advanced high school American history classes. And that's what Flynn is angry about. Why are these people like me asking you to read Zinn's book? And that these people are undermining the support of the American people through their teaching for their system of government, for the American system of government, the American creed that we briefly talked about in class, and that this system of government has produced the greatest power that the world's ever seen. And the source of American power is the attraction of the American model. It's not just America's weapons. It's the attraction of the United States. It's American soft power. And American soft power is very, very widespread because America is very attractive. And if you read the Zinn book, you don't know or come across about any of that, about what makes America so attractive. It's all about the failures and shortcomings and ulterior or negative real motivations of people like George Washington or Abraham Lincoln or going further back, Christopher Columbus. But rather than understand the sources of America's greatness, instead Zinn and others are seeking to basically, according to Flynn, make American students feel ashamed of their country, feel ashamed of who they are, particularly if they're white people. And so do you think that that is a valid criticism of that Flynn has of Zinn? You think that's what Flynn is trying to say?
Yes, I think so.
And do you think, well, how do you think Howard's, like I said, Howard Zinn died 11 years ago. How do you think if Howard Zinn were alive today, how do you think he would respond to that criticism, that critique? Do you think Zinn would say, he would agree that he's trying to teach American white children to be ashamed of themselves?
No, I think so.
Yeah, of course he would deny that, right? I mean, so what do you think Howard Zinn would say he's trying to do? Well, I tell you, I mean, because I'm an American, right? So I grew up in America, and I mean, Americans are always taught from, at least they were when I was a small child, about how America is a great country, and the people that created the United States and founded the United States, people like George Washington, that they were all almost superheroes, that they were somehow and that people that dissented, that people that critiqued or attacked the government and the laws that existed, that somehow those people were troublemakers, that those people were somehow there was something wrong with them. And that's not just an American tendency. That's a tendency that people who belong to the majority, typically the majority population of South Korea, like for example, the people, right-wing people who hate Moon Jae-in. I mean, the conservative right-wing people, many of them, Christians, they don't like Moon Jae-in. And they don't like Moon Jae-in, and they don't like the people that support Moon Jae-in, because they think that they're somehow attacking the system that produced this miracle on the Han River, right? The miracle on the Han River, South Korea. I mean, in less than 70 years, it went from one of the poorest countries in the world to one of the richest countries in the world. And did that happen because of socialism? Did that happen because of trade unionism? Did that happen because of leftism? No, it didn't. It happened because of these conservative traditional values closely associated with capitalism and United States, that and anti-communism and anti-leftism more broadly, that produced this miracle. So are we supposed to focus so much in Korean school systems about the atrocities that happened under Ri Syngman, about the killings that happened at the beginning of the Korean War? Are we supposed to focus upon primarily upon the bad things that Park Chung-hee did when he was dictator of South Korea? I mean, what kind of school system would that be if we had a book for Korean history like Zinn's history for the United States? I mean, when you read Zinn's book, do you read about America's greatness? Do you read about America's tremendous achievements that make it so powerful and appealing and attractive to the whole world? No, you read about the bad things that these people did, that Americans are taught to admire. And so Zinn knows that American students have been getting that from the time they're born until maybe they go to high school or college. And so the Zinn book is supposed to be an alternative perspective. I think Zinn even says that in the book. His book is supposed to be an alternative perspective, so that to help American students have a more complex understanding of the forces that produce the United States, of the history of the United States, and the forces that produce the United States, and that produce not just history, but change and development of a society today and into the future. Because societies always are changing. And what we take for as obvious today, it wasn't obvious 200 years ago. Like I was talking about with the previous student, right? I mean, 200 years ago in the United States, most people would, not all, but most people would have thought it's ridiculous, this notion that women should have the right to vote. Women? if you imagine we go back to 1821, and you asked Americans that you ran into, should women have the right to vote? Most Americans say, no, of course not. Women are too weak. They're too dependent. They don't have the will. They don't have the mind. They don't have the ability to be equal citizens with the rest of us. They do what their husbands tell them. I mean, of course not. Some would. So yeah, sure. But those people, they would have been looked at in 1821 as, this person's kind of sick. What's wrong with that person? It's weird. What is that with him? Why isn't she married? Why isn't she having children? Why doesn't she have babies? What's wrong with her? But today in 2021, most everybody assumes, of course, women should have the right to vote. We don't even think about it. But that change happened because critically because people fought for it. And they fought for it when it was still an unpopular, beginning way back before it happened, when it was an unpopular position to take. Now, they were fighting, and their fight wasn't the only cause for that change, because the society was changing, right? American men were going off to fight in the First World War and in the Second World War. And so they needed workers in factories. So you saw in the early 20th century, women start to move into the factories as workers, which we hadn't really seen before on a massive scale. I mean, there was some, but like for women to come in and work, I mean that, and so what you could see, women, they can work. We have technology, we have tools that they can use. You don't have to be, you have to have big, strong muscles you can do other kinds of work in a factory that using the power equipment and the technology. And then of course, and this would continue particularly into the Second World War, when it was even bigger mobilization, and lots of women were working in the factories because the women were not allowed to be in the military, and men were drafted into the military. And again, technology makes a difference, but still, this notion that, like, for example, women's rights to not be sexually harassed at the workplace, or not to be discriminated against in terms of getting less money for the same work that men do. Those required. It required groups of people to fight and organize their political capabilities, and these people, and organize them to act as a political group, a political force to bring about change in the laws, even though, of course, the laws were reflecting the interests of those people that were already in the establishment. They're already in the way the system existed, the status quo. So they're going to have a vested interest in protecting those rules, because they emerged on top of a system around those rules. And so they're going to cause conflict, even as but the fact that society has changed means that more and more people are going to be receptive to their arguments that we have to change society. Mm-hmm. So, but that's the point Zinn makes, that these changes just don't happen because rich, powerful white men feel bad. They happen because there are political forces that are being organized, reflecting changing American society, and that these emerging political forces being organized and expressed and directed at often illegal activity. If you want to make people pay attention to you when the laws and the police are being used to maintain the status quo, you often have to engage in what is now called civil disobedience. You've got to break the law in order to change the law. And like, for example, I was talking about, let's take something that's very, very sensitive topic for everybody, because everybody thinks about, sex and, you know, and women and, you know, and men and it's on like, so women have the right to, should women have access to abortion? It's illegal still in South Korea, right? Even though it's very, very widespread. I mean, when I read the New York Times and people say it's illegal, but it's very common.
Yeah.
Is that normal? Is that right? That, well, you know, it's illegal, but women, if they, you know, and of course, a good woman, if she gets an abortion, she doesn't tell anybody because, you know, it's okay for men, you know, to have sex for fun, for recreation. We kind of expect that from men, you know, because that's what men do, man. But a woman, oh, she can't, you know, and of course, a man can't have sex without a woman, typically. So why these double standards? And particularly when more and more women need to work in Korea, because it's so expensive to raise a family, the woman has to work because the family can't survive without two incomes, two salaries from the mother and the father, both working to make some money so that they can raise their child and send their child to college, right? And so you see these forces at work, but then somebody's got to make the radical claim that, you know, that we need to make abortion legal. Because if we want women to be truly viewed as equal and treated as equal in society, we have to change the laws so people stop being ashamed about being a woman. And, you know, and getting pregnant when a man wants to have sex. And you know, so you can see, you can feel the emotion, you know, the contradictions in there. And of course, Korea today is very different from Korea of 1821 or 1921. In 1921, Korea was an agricultural society, you know, not many factories. You know, there was just people lived on as peasants on the countryside. So, yeah, I mean, you know, and then, but the world has changed. But again, it changes because people demand and push and organize themselves to change the laws. And they encounter opposition. Because you see people like Flynn argue or conservative Christians argue in Korea, it was these traditional conservative values that made the miracle on the Han River or made America the most powerful, attractive power in the world. Not socialism, not feminism. It was these traditional values in which you have small, in the United States case, let's get back to the United States, small government, capitalism, free enterprise capitalism with no regulation, and that's that focus that there should not be big government, big powerful governments, and that's the argument for people, however, that support people like Howard Zinn and his ideas that if you want to correct the weaknesses and sicknesses and marginalization of Black people or Hispanic people, you need the government to act. The government needs to do things. The government needs to adopt policies and implement those policies, and you need a bureaucracy. You need people to be paid to oversee those policies, to enforce those policies. You need government to monitor. You need a bigger government for social and economic justice, right? If you want to have, for example, like, you know, a national healthcare service in the United States as a human right, you're going to expand government if you're going to have to do that. But you recall that according to traditional American values, you know, big government bad. But at the same time, people like Flynn and others, they don't focus too much on the big government involved in the defense industry. I mean, the American Defense Department and manufacturing in the economy to supply the American Army, Navy, and Air Force, that constitutes about 10% of America's manufacturing supplies the military. So you already have big government. In regard to the American military, I mean, the American military budget's almost $800 billion a year. Do you see Daniel Flynn criticizing this huge military? No, because I think people like Daniel Flynn, they find what they're concerned about is America's power in the world. And America's power in the world includes its attraction, but it's also its attraction because it produces such an incredible wealth and technology. And that this wealth and technology saved the world from communism, from the Soviet Union. In spite of people like Howard Zinn, in spite of Howard Zinn's followers who are teaching or are implying to American students that they should feel ashamed of their country, that they should be ashamed of being white people, that in spite of that weakening of America's national morale that Howard Zinn and his followers express or propagate like a sickness, like a cancer, America saved the world, saved Koreans, saved the world from communism, from the Soviet Union, the Russian version, supposed Russian version of Nazi Germany. So that's why I think Flynn is so angry, because the roots of people like Flynn and supporting Flynn, they go back to the 1970s with the Vietnam War and the defeat of the United States in Vietnam, and then the humiliations and embarrassment of the United States through its domestic crises, its economic weaknesses, and the expansion of socialist governments in Africa and in Central and Latin America, right? So the United States goes into the Vietnam War under Lyndon Johnson, a Democrat, mind you. Richard Nixon does everything he can to get America out. You'll read about this later in the second half of the course. Republican, and he's despite the opposition of the new left protesters like Howard Zinn and his followers who are leading those protests, and so the United States goes into instability with too much labor activism, too many strikes, high inflation, and then the other humiliations happen. The Soviet Union expands or sends its allies and friends to expand their influence in Nicaragua, in Grenada, in Central America, in Africa and Angola and Mozambique, in Somalia, in Ethiopia, and then the American embassy is taken hostage in the Islamic Revolution that overthrows America's friend, the Shah of Iran, in 1979. And the Islamic Revolution happens, and the Muslim Islamists there seize the American embassy and hold the American embassy personnel for 444 days. And Jimmy Carter, the Democrat, is all weak and looks humiliated, unable to solve these problems. And Ronald Reagan emerges in this new upsurge of American pride and nationalism, and to a counterattack against Howard Zinn and all those people that people like Daniel Flynn blame with America's weakness, for America's failures, America's weakness. They blame on internal dissidents like Zinn and those new left social movements. And that thanks to Ronald Reagan and the rise of American nationalism and the allies of the rise of American traditional nationalism, that we overcame, finally revived ourselves and defeated the Soviet Union, and the Soviet Union disappeared, in spite of Zinn and his followers. And so, and that is the I think a lot of the source of the hostility that Flynn has towards Zinn. It's this notion that people like Zinn and the followers, they are a source of American weakness, not strength. So do you have any questions?
No.
Okay, so all right, so let me remind you, you might want to get rid of the first person, because when you use less first person, when you use that less, when you get rid of, you use less words in your prose. You'll be more specific in your wording, and that means you'll be able to meet that 550 word text limit. So let me send that to you there, and I will later in the day post the recording on YouTube so you can watch it again if you want to. Okay.
Okay.
Okay. So we'll end that there.